this is where I get to ask our key researchers a little bit about how it's been for them, which for we who've been in the goldfish bowl for sort of 2 weeks is fascinating. I hope it is for you too. The first thing I wondered whether, because obviously a project like this is built around a model. It's built around a lab, as it were, lab conditions, but it's built around a model of a practice, but in our case, the Poettrio model. And I wondered whether the process had unfolded in the way you expected it to. Has the process been the kind of thing that you envisaged when you planned the project and set it up?
I guess to a certain extent, yes, in that maybe what I was most of my own experience is as a solo poetry translator, and I've already been looking at how solo translators who know the source language and work into the target language work. And in terms of the sort of solutions, the sort of things that the trio here was talking about, yes, you know, that it's not totally out of the park. You know, the people are tackling the same problems. I say problems. It's the sort of thing we do for the joy of it, sure. But the approaches, yes, they're very similar. You can see a great respect for the source poet there, and a love of the source poem, which is shared by all three, and then a sort of nerdish enthusiasm for, well, what does that word mean, or what is the particular metric theme running through there, and an enthusiasm for making it work as poetry in the target language. But
what about you, Sergio, and you, Rebecca? Have you sort of witnessed a lot of co-translation before, as opposed to translation?
Never. Well, I suppose when I was doing German undergraduate, but yeah, I mean, when we designed the whole laboratory process, we were quite kind of mechanistic about it. You know, we made timetables, we had Excel documents, etc. We told people when they were going to have a coffee, go to the loo, eat lunch, etc.
That was mostly me. Sorry about that.
And of course, bodies are not very disciplined, as the previous poem that we just heard sort of suggested. The teeming flesh of our target and source poets and language advisors rebelled against our attempts to keep them shut in the room. But also that physicality showed in various ways. For example, Helene, the target poet earlier on, got up and skipped around the room to demonstrate the kind of movement she wanted to convey through her words to help the target poet render it into English. Similarly, in Rotterdam, we had things where the city started coming into the room through the window. The unfamiliar sounds of the tram helped Bill come up with a solution for a verb. And so what we realised is that what appeared initially to be a highly sort of structured, formal process became this embodied, messy, lively thing. People were exhausted, people were energetic, people were hungry, people zoned out, zoned in again, etc. But despite that, they produced a vast amount of work. I mean, we really felt like slave drivers by the end. Yes. And yeah, because everyone's been working like 14-hour days, pretty much. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing that surprised me the most. The fact that people were so productive, extremely so. We didn't give them, well, in a way, the only deadlines they had to do with their presentations, both in Rotterdam and here in Newcastle. So they knew that they have to come up with something. But we didn't set up a quota, which would be quite difficult to do in any case. But everything worked out really, really well. People were quite determined to not only produce a lot of translated poems, but also really good quality ones. And that's something that's really stood out. The fact that they were so determined to come up with something that stood on its own in English, because it's not an easy proposition. But the fact that you have the 3 people in the room helps a lot, and having a target poet working on the translation affords you a lot more options in terms of which linguistic choices they're going to be in the poem that really are acceptable within the target culture. And honestly, we were mightily impressed by everything that happened during the sessions, in the sense that the poems they came up with are great poems in English.
Well, thank you for that. So to sort of shift the lens slightly, because of course we're not only making versions of poems, we're making research material. That's to say, we're making evidence for you guys to analyse. And I wonder whether your modes of analysis are going to change, whether, for example, it's going to be more qualitative and less quantitative than you thought, or are you going to be...
Yeah, I mean, I think whilst there is a vast amount of quantitative data that we produce from the transcriptions that we'll be coding and analysing and breaking down, I think what we didn't anticipate is how much sort of out of frame qualitative and methodological data we'd be gathering just through what I kind of mentioned in the first question, is that people don't do what you want them to do necessarily, or they do it differently to how you think they're going to do it, and the routes that they use to get there aren't what you necessarily imagine, and the things that impact that are very embodied, emotional. Also, this whole thing that often would happen is the sort of durational element to the translation, where time would have to pass to arrive at a solution. It wouldn't necessarily arrive just because you're trying and you're looking up and you're using dictionaries. The memory was suggesting perhaps overnight during sleep in a break when you didn't imagine it, or if you saw something or whatever. So there's both method and some kind of unspoken embodied process that's always happening, a sort of gestation. And I suppose that is going to also become into the frame. It is going to be part of the frame, I suppose, of our scrutiny.
And we're extremely fortunate because not only do we have that contextual information about the translation process, we have a lot of information about translation as a process itself, and we have the products. So that's a lot of information we can analyze. And at the same time, we have the interlinears, which are another text that we can analyze. So there's so much information that I don't think we will have time to cover everything. But I'm really fortunate, and I feel that we're very fortunate to have so much data. And as you know, I love data.
I think in terms of the findings, what we're showing, at least what we're seeing so far, is that there is no one way to poetry translation, to translate a poem, and it's, I think, perhaps something that people who are working on poetry translation do know. But what I was intrigued to see was the different ways in which, say, as a researcher this week, I was sitting in on Menno Wichmann's, 3 of Menno Wichmann's groups, and it was really interesting to see the different routes which people were taking. So, say, analytic or holistic translation style. Do you like details, or do you like the whole and come down to the details, or do you go from the details to the whole? But I think what's really interesting is the different routes usually converge in very much the same place. We're making a poem which works in terms of semantics, in terms of image, in terms of rhythmic movement, and that I find immensely cheering.
So I suppose the next question, the obvious next question is, what about the plans for what you're going to do with all this data? What are your plans?
We'll be spending a good few months going through transcripts. We've got genius transcribers who are transcribing Dutch and English and giving us margin translations in the margin of the Dutch. We'll be coding and counting, but also just seeing the stories, seeing the shapes. And yes, we've got plans to publish the poems in poetry journals and in the Netherlands, in the UK. We want to, we put in an abstract to a conference, Translation Studies conference in Hong Kong next year.
Two
So
abstracts.
fingers crossed. 2 abstracts, great. I wasn't sure if you, end of the month is the deadline, so that's brilliant. A book, we'll be writing a book, academic articles, articles in Translators Journals.
We'll be having a big event in Roehampton next year as well with more
Yeah.
performances, which will be
TBC.
Yes.
Want to add anything?
Yes, we'll be sharing more about this on the website as well, including many of the wonderful contributions that you'll see here in the second half, but also work that's we've produced for this event, include some of which you've just seen, some of which you're about to see, and including the video of this evening, so you'll be able to re-watch, re-hear, etc.
Sophia, do you want to add anything? Rubbing your hands in glee.
No, I'm just generally very excited about the project. I was very fortunate to join it. I've always been involved in poetry translation as a researcher and as an amateur translator as well.
And a poet.
And a
And a
poet.
poet as well.
And
So
poet.
this is I feel like a kid in a candy shop.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thanks.